An aerial assault launched by Iran against Israel overnight. The Israeli army says more than 300 missiles and drones were fired. Almost all the missiles were intercepted by Israel and the United States. The UK and Jordan also shot down drones. Now, air raid sirens sounded across Israel and explosions were heard in Jerusalem. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard says the assault is in retaliation for an attack on its consulate in Syria on April 1st, which killed 16 people, including several Iranian generals. It is the first time Iran has launched a direct military attack on Israel, despite decades of hostilities. Now, there has been widespread international condemnation of the Iranian attack. President Joe Biden repeated the United States' ironclad support for Israel. Secretary General Antonio Guterres criticized what he called a serious escalation by Iran. The UN Security Council has called an emergency meeting. Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock also condemned the attack, saying it could plunge the entire region into chaos. And British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called the assault reckless and vowed to stand up for Israeli security. Israeli authorities have now given the all-clear, meaning people no longer need to stay close to air raid shelters. But our correspondent, Amian Isif, says it was a tense and noisy night in Jerusalem.
As you can hear, the sirens are going off. As you can hear, sirens are going off in Jerusalem. You can see Iron Dome is active. The air defense is active in the skies. So we're going to head to a shelter now, but a lot of chaos in the streets, a lot of screaming, people running for cover.
Let's get the very latest from our correspondent, Tanya Kramer, joining us now live from Jerusalem. Tanya, welcome. Tell us the latest about the situation in Israel this morning.
Well, it is quiet for now, but the army says they're remaining on high alert. However, the airspace has reopened, we've been told so. But this comes, of course, for Israelis and Palestinians, waking up after such a night. This is somewhat a different reality after these direct and unprecedented attacks from Iran on Israel. Now, we are hearing more details now also coming in this morning from the Israeli military. They said that over 300 drones and missiles were launched from Iran, but also from other countries, such as from Lebanon. There were rockets from Yemen, but also some from Iraq. They're saying that most were intercepted before they reached Israeli territory by the air defense forces, by a coalition of strategic partners, as the Israeli military has said. And they also said that 99% were intercepted. So with some ballistic missiles, however, reaching and hitting somewhere in Israel. One of them was hitting they said, the Nevatim air base in the south. We don't have a full assessment there, but they're saying it was only minor damage. But also a child has been injured, critically injured, potentially by shrapnel. Now, of course, after all this happened, the question is now, what will Israel do? How will they retaliate? How will they respond to this?
That is indeed the big question here, Tanya. What do you think Israel's next move will be? Are there signs that we might see a swift retaliation?
Well, this is, of course, the question right now. There has been also a phone call between U.S. President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the course of the night. And there is an indication that the United States, they don't want to see a wider regional escalation coming out of that. They have also said that the U.S. helped actually Israel to take down nearly all of the incoming drones and missiles, and that Israel should see this as a success in a way that they could reboot all those, most at least, of those missiles coming in. Now, it will be in the hands now of the War Cabinet to decide the next steps. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Galant, and we just have to wait and see whether, how they will decide, whether there will be retaliation. And, this could affect, of course, most of the region here. and many don't want to see, of course, a wider escalation.
Tanya, thank you so much for your reporting. That is Tanya Kramer for us in Jerusalem. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden says he will convene the G7 countries to plan a diplomatic response to Iran's attack. Biden announced the meeting after speaking to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by phone. Now, Biden told Netanyahu Israel demonstrated a remarkable ability to defend against unprecedented attacks, sending a clear message that Israel's security cannot be threatened. Biden also said the U.S. has not seen any attacks on its own troops in the region, but confirmed U.S. forces helped Israel take down nearly all of the drones and missiles launched from Iran. Let's get the perspective from Washington, D.C. and speak to our reporter, Stefan Simons. Stefan, Biden has cut short his weekend trip to Delaware to hold crisis talks with his national security team. We know his defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, earlier spoke to his Israeli counterpart. What has the U.S. said publicly about this attack?
Well, of course, the U.S. president, as well as the entire administration, was very, very quickly to stand by Israel officially and with statements. This ironclad standing by Israel quote comes from National Security Council statement, which was given on Saturday. Now, the president has reiterated that this will be a U.S. position, that when Israel is attacked and has to defend itself, the U.S. will do everything it can to support Israel. And so it did during this attack or drone and missile attack by Iran. The U.S. is saying that it shot down itself 70 missiles/drones during this attack and helped Israel by doing so defend itself. But as said by my colleague Tanya out of Jerusalem, the Biden administration is very, very, very keen on really putting a lid on this now. Iran apparently has concluded, or has said, the UN mission, the Iranian mission, permanent mission at the UN has relatively early on, Saturday still, said, okay, that concludes the matter for us. We retaliated. And the Biden administration is now, as we also reported, in telephone calls and communication with Israeli counterparts, saying now a return to measured responses is necessary, not a retaliation by Israel, to not escalate this into a wider, full-scale regional conflict.
So let's dig in a little bit more into Washington's support. Of course, support for Israel, a mainstay of U.S. Foreign affairs over decades. What do you think ironclad support promised here is going to mean in concrete terms?
Two-pronged approach, that is, militarily speaking. The United States has many, many assets, Navy assets, air defense assets in the region, Red Sea, Strait of Hormuz, Eastern Mediterranean. This is sophisticated weaponry, fighter jets and whatsoever. And there will be defensive support for Israel. That doesn't mean boots on the ground, U.S. military engagement with U.S. soldiers anywhere near or close or anywhere in the region there on behalf of Israel or anybody else, but support with military assets, specifically intelligence, geospatial, radar information and intelligence, et cetera, this will come from the United States and will be continuously provided to Israel. That's what that means. On the other hand, it's of course diplomatic support, and that is, and we see already the results of this. It is reaching out to all partners and allies of the United States, not just NATO partners and friends. And in Europe, it also partners and allies in the Middle East, and meaning by this Arab partners. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, those countries, the U.S. is trying to make sure that all of them are on the same page in trying to de-escalate here now, meaning to really prevent a full-scale regional conflict from happening.
Thank you so much. That is DW's Stefan Simons in Washington, D.C. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Galant, has praised the Israeli forces for blocking the attack, and he paid tribute to Israel's allies for their support.
The
state of Israel has faced an attack of hundreds of missiles and drones.
the Israel Defense Forces have done an impressive job of blocking the offensive. Together with the United States and other partners, we managed to defend the territory of the State of Israel. The whole world saw tonight who Iran really is. It's a terror state that attacks Israel from a distance of 1,500 kilometers and tries to activate all of its proxies. But the world has also seen the power of a coalition and how Israel stands alongside the US and other countries to block this attack.
And in the studio, I'm now joined by DW's Middle East analyst, Shaiarosanes. Shani, good to see you again. How easy do you think it is going to be for Israel and the United States to agree on a clear response to this Iranian attack?
Well, it seems to be another battle coming, when it comes to Israel and America trying to find together a response. Because the way the Americans see it, Israel needs to respond according to the result, which seems to be quite a, almost a poor one. If the Iranians wanted to, it seems like the way American defense forces are interpreting is that this was mostly a declarative statement by the Iranians. We have shown to the Israelis we are not afraid, but eventually there's very little damage done on the ground.
More limited than it could have been.
Correct. And then on the other hand, when you look at Israelis, they mostly focus on the fact this is unprecedented and that this is, an attack on Israel's sovereignty. And they focus on the intentions of Iran. And so now it's the battle between Israel. I mean, a battle would be a harsh word, but it's going to be a back and forth on how to agree on a response. Is it going to be determined by the intent? And this is what Israel would want to do. And then there's the Americans. We see them. They're trying to bring down the escalation. They are very much not interested in an escalation into the regional war. And it's going to take, we'll see a back and forth in the next stages, definitely.
And what does it tell you, the fact that this response from Iran was more muted, it sounds like, than it could have been, and the fact that it took 2 weeks after this attack on Iran's embassy in Damascus on April 1st to see this kind of response, what does that tell you?
Well, first of all, there's a very clear chain of hierarchy and decision-making in Iran that takes time. But it's also, we're used to seeing this shadow war between Israel and Iran, this back and forth of attacks, cyber attacks, and so on. A lot of it in the shadows, a lot of it not unannounced. And the decision here definitely was for the Iranians, was determined, because of the Americans, and we've seen a lot of communication and intelligence coming about that, this back and forth. There was a need for the Iranians to show that they are not afraid, and this is also something that connects back to October 7th. The biggest asset that Israel lost on October 7th is deterrence. When the Israelis launched the attack in Damascus on April 1st, just 2 weeks ago, the assumption was that the Iranians are not going to operate so severely, definitely not from Iranian ground, definitely not directly into Israeli soil. So the fact that the Iranians have done that shows us there's something in the very delicate balance in this war that has been never official but very clear has been broken.
Do you think we've reached, in that sense, a point of no return here, that we are moving from this kind of shadow warfare to a direct attack on Israeli soil?
It very much depends on the Israeli response. And this is exactly what the Americans are trying to do. They're trying to prevent a response that will, bring to an escalation. But Israelis feel like one of their important needs in their long-term defense strategy is rebuilding deterrence. And that can only be done the way they see it, by being very aggressive in their responses to any attempt for any attack. I don't think we will see an immediate response in Israel. This is also partially why, the pace that we're seeing in this kind of conflict between Israel and Iran takes time, but the last word has not been said yet.
Shani, thank you as always. That's our Middle East analyst, Shaiarosanes. And we can speak now to Hans Jakob Schindler, a senior director of the Counter-Extremism Project. Thank you so much for speaking with us on DW News. I'd like to start with your thoughts on what has happened here. What do you make of the attack last night?
Thank you so much for having me. It was clearly a Iranian escalation, which is needless and unfortunately really complicates things, but it was an escalation, again, with an Iranian twist. So what happened is immediately after the drones and the rockets were launched from Iranian territory, Iranian state TV officially announced the launch, giving the Israelis hours, in the case of the drones, and very long time in the case of the missiles to actually get ready to defend themselves, including with the help of the Americans. So clearly the Iranians wanted to make a show of force and minimizing the damage that show of force would meet upon Israel. Including then, of course, getting their UN mission here in New York, and there's going to be a Security Council meeting later today, evening time in Germany, here in New York on this attack, getting the UN mission of all places to announce that this could be it from our side. This is our retaliation. Case closed if you choose to close the case. And then having the permanent representative to say, we no longer want any escalation and we only made use of our right to self-defense according to the UN Charter, which of course totally neglects the point that it has to be a proportional response, and 300 rockets and drones is not exactly a part, in the eyes of the Iranians, a proportional response.
So if I understand you correctly, it sounds like you think in this case, Iran needed to be seen to be doing something in response. Do you think that Iran could have mounted a stronger attack, and whether this was something it considered?
Yeah, I mean, they haven't put out all the stops. Don't forget, Hezbollah is in effect the extension of the Iranian regime in Lebanon. It does have a very sizable arsenal that has the potential to actually overwhelm Israeli air defenses. As we have seen in Ukraine, it's not the individual Shahid drones of the Iranians that are the problem. It's the number of Shahid drones that are fired that is the problem. And this number that was fired last night clearly was not sufficient to overwhelm the Israeli air defenses, nor, in my opinion, was it designed to do so. It was simply a show of force. Inside Iran now, of course, the regime celebrates this as a great success. But the problem is both sides have lost deterrence here. The Israelis have lost deterrence because it is unprecedented that it's the first time since the Islamic Revolution that Iran attacked itself from its territory, not via proxy, Israel. But also the Iranian really failure to hit anything, literally anything in Israel, means they now just demonstrated that potentially their systems are not good enough to withstand Israel, which then, of course, puts water on the mill of those in Israel who say, look, this is a good time to do a very forceful response and we'll pay a very little price because the Iranians just showed us their systems are not as good as they thought they were.
So with deterrence compromised, as you say, do you think that now, after almost more than a decade of proxy war, some kind of threshold has been crossed here where we've seen a direct Iranian attack on Israeli soil?
Just a small correction. The proxy war between Israel and Iran didn't start a decade ago. It started much, much longer ago. From the very beginning, the enmity against Israel was part of the core ideological tenets of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So it's been at a higher level in the last decade, but it's always been there. It's always been one of the, as I said, core ideological themes of the Iranian regime. What happened now is really we are in a new situation in the Middle East, and there's really no good way out of this because both sides have to find a new equilibrium again. And we are not yet there that it becomes clear what that new equilibrium actually would mean.
How concerned are you about the likelihood of escalation here? How do you expect the Israelis to react?
I mean, it's a very, very, very tense situation. And any misstep from either one of the sides is going to really lead to a potentially uncontrollable escalation here. We already have a virtual shooting war, not only with Gaza, but also with the Houthis and Hezbollah for many, many months since October 7th. We now have this direct attack here. If the Israeli response is attacking inside Iran, and then there are also levels of escalation that the Israelis could choose. They could just simply attack some of the military installations from which those rockets and drones were launched. This would be a classic US response to hit those places from which you were attacked. But the Israelis could also decide to first finally solve what the Israeli government has always said is the major threat, the actual strategic threat from Iran. It's its nuclear program, and attack the Iranian nuclear installations inside Iran, which would be another major, major escalation. Hence, these unnamed US officials who are, talking to the media here in the United States saying, Biden said to Netanyahu, we will defend you and we are ironclad on your side, but we will not support you in any offensive operations inside Iran. Now, if this is really what the American president has said to the Israeli prime minister, whose country just got attacked, it is a very, very unprecedented statement from an American president. And it really shows how deep the concern is in the US administration that this now can get out of control.
Do you think the US administration is also concerned about spread outside the region?
Well, look, I mean, my personal assessment was that it's very likely that the Iranians would respond with attacks against Israeli diplomatic and official institutions outside the region, which is something that the Iranians had done before. Remind you, there was attack in South America, in Argentina, against a embassy and a cultural center in the 1990s. Even in Berlin, where you are right now, in 1992, there was a killing of some Iranian exiled politicians. In the Mykonos attack, there was a bombing of Israeli tourists in 2012 in Burgas, Bulgaria. So Iran has demonstrated that it can also attack and strike outside the region with the help, by the way, of Hezbollah operatives in each one of these cases. So, there are levels of retaliation that Iran has not yet taken.
And what do you expect Iran's proxies in the region, like Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels, to do here?
Well, I mean, one has to differentiate between the proxies and the control that Iran ultimately has over these proxies. Now, Hezbollah is a 100% Iranian creation. It was at the core of forming Hezbollah during the civil war in Lebanon in the 1980s from the onset. So Hezbollah really is an extension of the Islamic Republic. Other proxies, especially the Houthis, have really been newly added to the Iranian portfolio of proxies, only really after 2015 and the attack of Saudi Arabia, the UAE and the Arab states on the Houthis in Yemen. Did the Iranians see an opportunity here, strengthen their relationship, build up the Houthis in order to essentially let their regional rival, Saudi Arabia, bleed. Now, the Houthis are therefore less indebted to the Iranians than Hezbollah is, and therefore Iran will always be able to tell the Houthis to shoot. If the Iranians ultimately can tell the Houthis to stop shooting, and they will, that still remains to be seen. For example, we've for months now really been attempts to calm down the Houthis and to tell them that it's not worth continuing to harass shipping in the Red Sea. And so far, the Iranians, even if they tried, doesn't seem to be able to stop them. So the escalation can also come inadvertently by these proxies who are, in various measures of control of Iran.
Now, as you say, we've seen shipping disrupted in the Red Sea. What do you think the effect here might be on energy markets if we do continue to see an escalation in the region?
So far, international transport has managed to avert a real crisis when it comes to the Red Sea. Of course, container prices have doubled, shipping insurance have tripled, and ships need to go now around the African continent, which adds 10 days. However, this is not really affecting energy exports so far. However, the Iranians, just before they launched those rockets and drones, actually took a Israeli-owned or linked ship to the Zodiac group of Eyal Ofer, the MSC Ares, in the Strait of Hormuz off the port of Fujairah hostage. Essentially, like pirates, took a helicopter and basically forced the ship to enter an Iranian harbor. Now, if this continues, the Strait of Hormuz is actually a very large energy supply route, not only for Saudi and UAE oil, but also for LNG from Qatar, which supplies in a major way both Australia and Japan, and in an increasing manner, the European Union, including Germany, because as the German government and the EU signed gas LNG deals with Qatar, in part to substitute the gas we are no longer purchasing from Russia. So any trouble in the Strait of Hormuz is, of course, a major immediate concern for energy prices on the globe. However, this is also a lose-lose proposition for the Iranians, because their tankers also need to leave the Strait of Hormuz. And the US has enough military assets in the Persian Gulf to make sure if other ships can't leave or enter, definitely Iranian tankers also won't leave or enter the strait. So this is hopefully an escalation stage that the Iranians are not contemplating and taking, whatever the Israelis are doing.
And I'm curious if you could tell us what kind of diplomatic efforts we've seen from Israel's allies in Europe, including Germany, to try to de-escalate the situation here.
Well, in the run-up to this, the American administration really pulled out all the stops. They were very clearly communicating. I remind you, President Biden said simply don't, that the Iranians shouldn't attack Israel. They asked China, Turkey, Germany, the UK, European states, as well as Arab states, to talk to the Iranians, to tell them not to do this. None of this came to fruition. Now, of course, there is going to be the G7 meeting later today. There's the Security Council meeting. China has already warned against escalation. It is certainly not in the interest of Russia to see its newly found ally in the Ukraine war, Iran, significantly weakened. So there is significantly forces that can tone down the Iranian side. It all really depends on what the Israeli decides now. The Iranians are in a very uncomfortable position. You always can decide to start an escalation. You rarely are the one who is deciding when to stop it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today with your insights. That is Hans-Jakob Schindler from the Counter-Extremism Project. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.